Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to talk about a few
missed opportunities.
That's right. Today I want to do a missed opportunities video. I've done a few of these on comic books before and comic book related things before, but today I want to do one that's probably the most out of my wheelhouse. I want to talk about a sitcom. Not just any sitcom, but one from the 1970s and 80s called Three's Company. You have probably heard of this show. It was a sitcom started in 1977. It's about a guy named Jack Tripper. He meets these two girls. Their roommate left their apartment to get married right before the series begins, and he meets them. They need a new roommate so that they're not having to pay as much on the rent themselves, and he needs a place to live, so they all agreed that he can live there. But the problem is, the landlord and landlady who own the apartment complex, specifically the landlord, he is a very old-fashioned guy, and he does not believe that a man can live with a woman without any kind of sexual stuff going on. So eventually, one of the girls, Janet, she convinces the landlord that Jack is gay, and that's basically what it takes to get the landlord to let Jack live there. So from that point on, you've got all sorts of hilarity ensuing with the landlord having misunderstandings about Jack. Jack kind of has to pretend that he's gay. He can't have girlfriends over, or he can't even be seen flirting with a girl or anything like that, because if he is, then the landlord might see him and then the game might be up. Stuff like that going on. Now, there are a few broad changes that I would have made to the show that I think would have made it more consistently a better series. The landlord and the landlady are Mr. and Mrs. Roper, and they were only on the series for 3 seasons. The show lasted 8 seasons in total, but they were only on the show for the first 3 seasons, and then they got their own show called The Ropers, and I believe The Ropers only lasted 2 seasons. I've never seen an episode of The Ropers. I'm not especially interested in seeing it. But my big issue is, I felt like the Ropers worked better when they were bouncing off of the 3 roommates, and likewise, I think that the show lost a little bit of a family dynamic when the Ropers left and we got a new landlord in Mr. Furley. Now, Mr. Furley, played by Bob Knotts from the Andy Griffith Show, I actually think Mr. Furley is funnier than the Ropers. With the Ropers, very quickly, you watch 2 or 3 episodes and you get pretty tired of them. They've got the same old shtick. Mr. Roper's grumpy, Mrs. Roper's hot to trot. That was basically their dynamic for the entire time that they were on the show. Very rarely did I see them playing outside of that kind of same story. They were very rarely doing anything else, and as a result, I think the comedy with those 2 characters just didn't really work very well. But I do think that there was a certain family dynamic, as I said, that was lost when those 2 characters were put in their own show. And also, those 2 characters just don't work as well when you don't have the 3 kids who are there with them, kind of making the situation a little bit different. So even though I think Mr. Furley is definitely funnier, and I think there was more story potential with him, and the show was able to do more things with him that they weren't able to do with the Ropers, I do think that the Ropers kind of added something that Mr. Furley did not have. And I think the show would have been fine if they had started with Mr. Furley from the beginning. Then it wouldn't have felt as disjointed and inconsistent. As is, when you're changing up the cast all the time, it really does feel like an entirely different show by the end of the series than it does at the beginning of the series. And the Ropers are not the only 2 cast members to have left the show for one reason or another. Now, with the Ropers, at the very least, they had their own show for 2 additional years before it ended. But with another character, Chrissy, played by Suzette Summers, I believe is her name, basically, in real life, the actress, Mrs. Summers, was wanting more money, and the studio was saying, well, no, you're not that much of a major character. So for Season 5, a portion of Season 5, I don't know how much of that season, basically her role was greatly reduced. They couldn't just outright fire her because she was on contract, so they reduced her role to the point where she was out of the apartment for some reason, and the remaining two roommates would call her character at the end of the episode to kind of tell her what was going on. And then at the end of the season, she was fired, and for the next season, we had her cousin, who was basically exactly the same character. She came in and replaced her, and then for the remaining two seasons, we had a completely different character. She came in and replaced the cousin. I actually think that Terry, the roommate for the final two seasons, I think she's a better character than Chrissy. Chrissy was basically just a dumb blonde, and there were times when she was so incredibly dumb that you have to wonder how she was even able to survive in the world, because she says and does things that are so incredibly stupid, it doesn't even seem real. She was a nice enough character, she wasn't, like, intolerable, but I did think that her stupidity as a running gag felt very old very quickly, in the same way that the Ropers and kind of their same old was kind of getting really old just after a couple of episodes of seeing them. So like Mr. Furley and how I wish that he had been part of the show from the very beginning, I also wish that Terry had been one of the other roommates from day one. Now, in the last two seasons, what little I have seen of Terry, she basically felt like Janet 2.0. They were both very smart, very witty, they wouldn't take any of Jack's nonsense, and that's okay. I really do think that if Terry had been part of the series from the beginning, then she would have had more of her own personality. With Chrissy, even though I found her stupidity to be pretty annoying and kind of implausible, she was her own character. She didn't feel like a duplicate of another character. But I almost got to the point where I would have rather had a duplicate of another character and get rid of this really dumb character if it meant having a different character. So I do think that the show could have been a lot stronger if it had had a more consistent cast throughout the entire series, instead of having to constantly change cast members, get rid of cast members, or put cast members in their own spin-off or whatever. But these things happened, and it was really real life kind of intruding on the show, so there wasn't a whole lot that could have been done. I just wish if I had my magic Etch-a-Sketch or whatever and I could just change a few things about the series, those are basically some of the things I would have changed. And there's one other thing that I really think my modern perspective of storytelling kind of influences my feelings on this. When the series first starts, you have Janet and you have Chrissy. Chrissy is your typical hot blonde. She's kind of stupid, but according to Jack, she has a really great body. Janet, she's the smarter girl, but she's also not as conventionally hot. Now, if you look at the two, neither one of them is ugly, but Chrissy is probably the one that you would say she's the more conventionally hot one, that all the guys are going to go after her and very few guys are going to go after Janet. This is more or less a plot point in the first season. You've got Jack, he's constantly like, yeah, Chrissy, she's really hot. And Janet is kind of sort of jealous. Like, there's one scene in particular where Jack pulls out Chrissy's chair and he's like, here you go, ma'am. And then he sits down and Janet's waiting for him to do that for her. But at the same time, she's like, yeah, he's just a guy. I don't really like him, but I kind of sort of do. Throughout the entire series, they hint at different points that these two could make a great couple, but they never go there. And that is really the major thing I would have changed about this series. It's really hard for me to keep watching the show whenever they don't go the way that it seems like they were planning to go from the beginning. You look at, especially the first season, it seems pretty clear to me that they were planning a sort of will they, won't they, in the sense that when you look at Jack and Janet, they're not really the two that you would expect to get together, and that's part of the reason why they would have worked so well together. I just think it would have been nice if after 2 or 3 seasons you start to develop what is initially just a friendship and turn it into more of a romantic friendship. And then by the end of the series, these two could flat out be in love with each other or be married or whatever. And then you could still play around with the idea that Jack has to pretend that he's gay and these two have to hide their relationship from the landlord, and that would have all been fine and good. Where this really becomes a problem is in the final episode of the series, Janet meets some guy that we have never seen before, and she gets married to him. And Jack meets some girl who we have never seen before, and he moves in with her. And then the series ends. And then Jack and this other girl, they move on into their own series called Three's a Crowd, I think, and that didn't last very long either, about as long as the Ropers. So I can kind of see why they were trying to get Jack with this girl so that they could have a spin-off, because if people like Three's Company enough for it to have 8 seasons, then maybe they would like a sequel with just one of the characters, but apparently that didn't work out. But even if the people behind this series wanted to set up Jack with some other girl so that he could be in a spin-off with this girl, it really just felt kind of forced and contrived. Like, oh, okay, he meets her and he immediately falls in love and he moves in with her. Same with Janet. It just felt like, oh, we have to end this series. We have to give these characters a little bit of closure. And they didn't really have any closure. It just felt like, and here we go, we're ending it. So I do think if they had done the kind of slow build romance with Janet and Jack, kind of like Chandler and Monica in Friends. If you've watched Friends, you know that for the first 4-ish seasons, those two really didn't interact much at all. They were just as much a part of each other's lives as everyone else in the group was, but you never would have said, oh, those two are going to get together, unless you had seen the last 6-ish years of the series, where they are very much in a relationship, they love each other, they make each other's lives better. That's kind of what I wish they had done with Jack and Janet. And if you go back and watch some of the very early episodes, it's pretty obvious, to me anyway, that they were kind of wanting to go in that direction, and for whatever reason they never did. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. I've recently been watching a few episodes of the series on YouTube, and I've seen several people in the comments say basically the same thing that I've said. They wish that Jack and Janet had been a couple. So I'm very obviously not the only person to think this. And that's about all I have to say here, guys. That is my missed opportunities video. Do you agree? Do you even have any idea what I'm talking about? If you've never watched Three's Company, I would suggest watching a few episodes. It's not the best thing in the world, but if you have several hours to burn, you could watch a few episodes and it would be pretty fun. But it's not a show like Friends, for example. I mentioned Friends earlier. That's a show that when you watch it for 10 years, you really feel connected to it. With Three's Company, part of it is the cast kind of being rotated in and out, changing a little bit over time. Some characters getting promotions, some characters they try to turn into main characters, and it's like, no, that's not going to work. I think for that reason, it's a little bit harder to build a connection to the show. But I do think it's a pretty fun show. It's smart, especially for the time. I don't watch a whole lot of stuff from the 70s and early 80s, but this was pretty fun. So I do think if you are looking for something to kill a little bit of time, then this is something that you might want to look into. That's about all I have to say today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with another kind of video. Have a good day.